Your Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Your Excellency Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi, President of Zanzibar, Chair of the Revolutionary Council and settler of the Mkapa Foundation, Your Excellency Philip Isidori Mpango, Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Excellencies, former Presidents of the United Republic of Tanzania and Revolutionary Government of Zanzibar, Your Excellency Othman Masoud, First Vice President of Zanzibar, Your Excellency Ahmed Suleiman Abdullah, Second Vice President of Zanzibar, Honorable Zuberi Maulid, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Mama Anne Mkapa, former First Lady and a widow of the President Benjamin William Mkapa, Honorable Mariam Mwinyi, First Lady of Zanzibar, Mama Fatma Karume, and former First Ladies, Honorable Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, and senior government officials, Chair and members of the Mkapa Foundation, Excellency Ambassadors, High Commissioners, and members of the Diplomatic Corps. I notice also this His Excellency Bilal, Vice President of the Third Republic, of the Third Government of Tanzania, is also here. I recognize him, and I will say all protocol observant, so that we don't leave anyone out. Thank you for reminding people that I spoke once at the OAU in Kiswahili in my opening remarks. That was just to remind people that Kiswahili was an official language of the OAU. And people then believed that I knew how to speak Swahili. But that is not as much true as you think. I cannot deliver my speech in Kiswahili, so I'm going to deliver it in English. I may speak Kiswahili barabarani, kubabaisha, and people may think that I know Kiswahili, lakini sio hivyo. I would like to start my remarks by thanking His Excellency Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi, the settler of the Mkapa Foundation and the President of Zanzibar and Chairman of the Revolutionary Council, for the kind invitation he addressed to me to participate in this second symposium in homage of my friend, comrade, and colleague, the third President of the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Benjamin William Mkapa. Because I believe that many of you might be putting the question, how these two became friends. I would like to take the minutes you gave me to recall how I and Ben became friends. Yes, Ben. That's how I called him. And he called me Joachim. Joachim. Because he could not pronounce Joaquim as we do in Portuguese. The first period of relationship occurred in the year 1966. That was a year when problems, seemingly internal problems in the Mozambique Liberation Front, were beginning to deserve a focused attention and more mobilization work both among the Mozambican people and the Tanzanian people and the world in general. The enemies of our struggle for independence were acting intensively within our ranks through their psychosocial welfare. It was something that in the Portuguese regime they had created to combat us, what was called psychosocial organization. We, Frelimo, performed the necessary mobilization among us, militants and the whole people at large, to bring up our awareness about the sneaky ways the enemy was using to attack us. But we needed to get our brothers in Tanzania to be also in alert, to understand what would seem merely internal problems with just internal causes, but they were not. We wanted the Tanzanian sisters and brothers to keep their solidarity to our struggle always high. Diversionist maneuvers had to be denounced and combated. We were keen to explain and sensitize as much as possible, as much as we could, the leadership of TANU and Afro-Shirazi Party, so that the alert could be extended to the rest of the organs and structures of the parties, to their social organizations and institutions, and therefore to the whole population of Tanzania. And for that, the media was of great importance. Benjamin Mkapa, Ben, at that period, was the managing editor of the two TANU party newspapers, the Nationalist in English language and Uhuru in Kiswahili. His capacity of listening and making deep and careful analysis of events brought to his his capacity of listening and making deep and careful analysis of events which were brought to his knowledge directly or through his journalists like Ferdinand Rohinda, Nsaka Isse, John Tesha, and others, made his newspapers to deliver to the readers a good coverage of our struggle with fairness and objectivity. His team of journalists never wavered in championing the cause of African liberation. Looking back, the level of the two newspapers under his editorship was by any standards very high. The armed struggle of the Front for Liberation of Mozambique was adding successes upon successes in such a way that in 1966 we already had some liberated and semi-liberated zones of our country. Although these were victories for us, they were quickly used by the enemy to try to divide our people and win some of our militants in a bid to stop the war. Those were part of the psychosocial war imposed on us. So Ben and his team of journalists fought with us this fight. Ben, besides his personal talents, had assumed the sentiments of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who believed that Tanzania would never be free while one single inch of Africa was under the yoke of colonialism and racial domination. Part of the journalists of the Nationalists and Uhuru became also good friends of Frelimo freedom fighters, and no longer looked at them as refugees, because in those days it was very difficult. We had to do a lot of job to educate our brothers and sisters in Tanzania, because they would look at us and say, huyo mkimbizi huyo. Huyo mkimbizi huyo, as if we're nothing, nobody. So I was saying that these journalists and Ben Kappa himself, they had left the attitude of many academically well-learned persons who looked at the refugees and the freedom fighters as human beings of the lowest class. When Ben was sent to work at the journal Daily News and Sunday News that came out when the Standard became a government paper with that new name, Daily News, I met him by chance on the road near the newspapers workshops. I did not like the way the newspaper, the Standard, wrote about our struggle. So I complained to him. In fact, I criticized the newspaper for distorting the events of our struggle. Ben listened to me carefully, but looking at me in a way that I could not understand which side he was. And after one question that I answered, he started a comment which he concluded by, well, anyway. And this expression, he would repeat it, anyway. Achawe. One would have taken him as an arrogant person, an intellectual talking with an undereducated who was younger than him. I am 2 years younger than him. But as the Daily News did no longer make those negative approaches which the Standard made, I believe that he had exerted his influence. Then I understood his anyway differently. I thought also that his anyway was an expression to respect my opinion, even if he did not fully accept it, to give time to think, so that we meet in other conversations, we speak the same language. Maybe I would have taken his views, or he would have taken my views, so he would respect. He wanted to remain focused on the important issues I had raised with him, and he have been always like that. Focus on what is important, whether for cooperation, for unity, and so on. The second period of interaction with Ben comes after a long time of separation, after the proclamation of the independence of Mozambique, when he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tanzania. First, between the years 1977 and 1980. I was already Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mozambique from the 1st of July 1975, as we proclaimed the independence in June of 1975. During this period, our main activity was focused on the work of the frontline states, particularly in support of the struggle of the peoples of Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Namibia, but also the fight of the Angolan people against the apartheid invasion and the occupation of parts of the Angolan territory, with the aim of impeding the consolidation of the independence of that country that was proclaimed also in 1975. We had to deal with the war of destabilization imposed on Mozambique by the racist regimes through proxy forces composed of Mozambican and Zimbabwean citizens recruited by them. I have enjoyed his deep analysis of the many situations confronting Africa, even beyond Southern Africa. When our 5 frontline heads of state met, we, the ministers of Foreign Affairs, had to be capable of producing before the meeting or during the meeting a press statement reflecting parts of their deliberations, which could be rendered public. Which would be rendered public right at the end of the meeting. So, we also had to quickly exchange views about the situation in our countries in Southern Africa. All the ministers had something to give. Some of us were freedom fighters who had no training in the diplomatic areas, but they had the empirical knowledge, in some cases, an experience of negotiating with the enemy, and others who, like Ben, were well trained in the area of international relations and in the area of journalism and in the area of the English language. There, we could benefit from the capacity of a synthesis and quick drafting of Ben. But Ben was not just a good writer. He was a good speaker who thought deeply before he delivered his speech. His speech always based on very clear principles. His speeches did not go in circles or spirals. When he addressed the enemy or the adversary, he was direct and clear, without losing the opportunity of delighting the English-speaking peoples with his refined English that the University of Makerere had given him. He was one of the most updated with the political and security situations of all the African countries, thanks to his capacity of quick reading and interpretation. We had to deal with the negotiations between the Zimbabwe movements and the colonial power, Great Britain. We had this, the front line, Anglo, on one side, and the other side, Great Britain. Besides what we had then the 5 frontline states with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. We joked that we were the two gangs of 5. And that was about Namibia, the second one. So we had to deal with these negotiations, on one hand with Britain, and the other hand among the liberation movements and the minority racist regime of Jan Smith, which took us up to Lancaster House, where the decision was made. We were equal states, but the role of Mwalimu Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, and Samora Machel were prominent, when it came to their capacity of leverage on the liberation movements of Zimbabwe and on the big powers of the West, but also the East. We, as foreign ministers, had to play the same role as our heads of state, but at our level, particularly when we went to participate in meetings without our heads of state. The responsibility was bigger for Ben Mkapa because he represented the chairman. From frontline states, SADC was born in 1980, while Ben was still foreign minister. At that year, he was given other functions. When we came back as foreign minister in 1984 to 1990, I worked with him also as foreign minister from 84 until 86, when I became head of state, 1986. But even after that, we continued to work friendly. In that period, although the problem of destabilization wars continued in Mozambique and in Angola, and apartheid persisted in South Africa and Namibia, other problems had to be attended to. The problems of development, poverty, hunger, climate changes, relationship between the economic North and the economic South, the problems of international trade, and so on, are examples of those Ben Mkapa was able to navigate in with some easiness. Now, not only thanks to his academic preparedness, but also thanks to his long experience of having represented his country in other countries of Africa and abroad. Finally, there was the last but one period that we worked together. That was when both we were heads of state. I was head of state since 1986. He joined me at that level in 1995. It was a period that the continent had to find the most correct ways to deal with the effects of globalization, liberalization, and had to find ways to preserve as much as possible the freedom, independence, and sovereignty of its peoples and states. At that time, weakened by the imposed wars with an increasing dependency on the so-called donors, today named partners, more and more under the control of the international financial institutions, all the countries had to undertake changes in all its behaviors to become aligned with only the policies and principles that were acceptable to those who in the world detained the power. Because if you said no, they'll say, okay, go ahead, but we are out. No more relations. It was necessary to be courageous, to take decisions and measures to change the path and the direction of our policies. Sometimes we could sense the dangers, but we could not dodge them. We had to face them. We had to find ways to mitigate its bad effects while continuing to fight for better days. And this comprised the need of working together in our Southern Africa region, in our continent, in the whole economic South. I may say that although traditionally Mozambique, in many occasions, looked for the inspiration coming An example coming from Tanzania in its developmental processes and in the diplomatic activity, this time, due to the difficult circumstances Mozambique lived in since the proclamation of its independence, characterized by a highly destructive destabilization war and frequent natural disasters that Tanzania was not experiencing, Mozambique was the first to introduce changes. Consultations and exchange of views or opinions between the two countries were made before the changes were effected. Short of better advice, the changes took place. Taking such decisions required courage. One had to understand that if he does not become the owner of his process of change, foreign powers would impose the changes on him, and he would therefore absolutely lose control of the affairs. So it was better to change by yourself before they force you to change and exert more control on you. Ben did study the situation, looked at what we had already done in Mozambique, designed his own model, and also courageously introduced changes. I am speaking of liberalization, market economy, multi-party system, the relations with several international institutions or instruments for international cooperation. He also took the courage to find ways to introduce changes in the behaviors of his citizens. Although traditionally Mozambique was inspired by Tanzania in the process of development, Ben Mkapa, in several occasions, acknowledged his admiration for what we were doing, as if he was discovering new sources of inspiration. And when he visited our country, he would frequently exclaim, "Jamani, nyinyi ni hodari sana," which in English stands for, "My people, you are hodari." It is, you are courageous, brave, valiant, efficient, capable. Yet, when I visited Tanzania after he became president, I could see tremendous development, and it gave me the desire to say the same word to him, "Wewe ni hodari." Particularly in what concerns efficiency. It was efficient in what he was doing, including this work of changing the mentalities of people. I understand that he did not fully meet all his dreams, but he left a solid basis for further successes. That's what we witnessed when Jakaya Kikwete took over, and when President Magufuli took over, and now Mama Suluhu taking over, and we see always Tanzania in progress. So he left a lot. I would like to say that I admired especially the good governance he displayed and his integrity so much that before I received the Mo Ibrahim Prize, without knowing that someone was thinking of me as a possible candidate or laureate, in answering to a question I could suggest as a candidate of the prize Benjamin Mkapa. I said, I regret that because Benjamin Mkapa is still in exercise, cannot be a candidate. That were the rules. I was thinking, who is the leader who could be deserve a prize as they are describing it? Actually, those who put me the questions, they were thinking about me. I discovered it later. And they wanted to know if I knew something about it. But I kept on looking around as who could be possibly a laureate of such a prize. And I said, Ben Mkapa. But he's still in power, and the criteria was that he should have left the government. He had a good governance. The last period of our interaction now was when he left the presidency and joined me as a member of the Forum for Former African Heads of State and Governments and Other Leaders, Africa Forum, of which I am the chairman. He gave a great contribution to the African Union in many aspects, including peacemaking and peace building. Besides this, he was part of the group of African personalities who were champions in the combat against HIV/AIDS. We created this group together. President Kaunda, himself, President, the first meeting was at Victoria Falls in the Zambian side, Moshotunya. And later it was President Mohai who became the leader of that group of the champions to combat AIDS. But later, the chairmanship remained with His Excellency Nkalema Petrus Monkanti as chairperson of the Champions for AIDS, Free Generation, who in this regard had this to say on behalf of the champions. I prefer to quote because this is the same sentiment that we, the champions, have about Mkapa on this subject. And I quote, His Excellency Benjamin William Mkapa was an outstanding member of the Champions for an AIDS-free generation. His selfless commitment to the global and regional efforts to end AIDS as a public health threat are evident in his unwavering position that inspired our leaders to commit to ending AIDS as a public health threat in Africa. It is seen in his passion and engagement of issues of sustainability and financing the AIDS response and for health, building the continent's future through investment in young people, their health and education, and addressing social and political determinants of the epidemic and inequalities. I may add to this that Ben believed that prevention, including male circumcision, was the only efficient and cheap way to follow in order to defeat AIDS. He said, prevention is better than cure. And he would say, we have to speak about this issue with the appropriate, the words without fear. To call the things by their names. How the disease comes, and to be in, so that people understand. We acted like that together. We're the champions. Went to different countries, including the United States of America, where we went there. I hope that I gave you the essential of what brought me what brought Ben and I together, and why I will always remember him as a friend, a comrade, and a colleague. Thank you.